Hey friends, this is Madam Chino, and I am here to share with you a little bit about my mask making journey for the coronavirus to supplement some of the shortage in the N95 masks that are typically used, potentially N99. I'm not really an expert on this, but what I do know is that we're trying to help the healthcare workers and people exposed to the virus to prevent their contagion. And there's information out there on the CDC website. There's continually info being released by particular hospitals about what they would prefer. And this is a bit of an adaptation of all of those things, although the pattern is pretty much open to interpretation. I've tried to adapt some of these interesting uses into the one that I created here. So it's said that of the household materials that we have, dishcloth is the best to use, although I found it's a little bit harder to get a hold of, but also it's not as easy to form. So of the basic materials that I have, I used a woven fabric, which is like a pillowcase, and a t-shirt fabric, which was supposed to be a little bit more effective than the woven fabric in creating that barrier. However, healthcare workers are utilizing these over other masks, and also potentially with the filter of another mask to increase the longevity of those single-use masks that they have. So some of the features of this one are the pleat that you see here to increase shape over the nose. The square edges at the sides to kind of keep it open part way. It makes it easier for this to fit over the nose. We've got the nose wire here, which will really do a lot to just creating closure on that gap of your nose and your cheek. And then in this, I've created a little opening here because the healthcare workers who might be using these could place that filter into that area in the center of these. Now, there has been some talk about creating another pocket on here. I chose not to do that just because for me, I felt that it did decrease the breathability of the mask itself. But healthcare workers who don't have that option here, they could always use a seam ripper or potentially cut and place that new filter within the existing mask from the inside. A lot of people are doing ear loops. They're like a little bit less elastic used in that. I created through the piping here 1 full piece of 32-inch elastic, and I created a little bit of an extraneous item, a fabric bead to keep these two kind of together on your head. That is totally not necessary if you're creating your own style mask, but I'm going to go through the steps to discuss this, and perhaps you can learn just a few things even if you've got your own design that can help you in what you're doing if you are making these and distributing them. So I've got my pattern here worked out. I've got a 7.5 inches wide by 6 inches tall. If you are trying to get that a little bit more expanded, or you have a few more pleats, I would say maybe a 7.5 by 7.5 inch wide by 7.5 inch tall, and then you'd have a few more pleats than just this one box pleat. And then I've got 2 side panels. These are the pipings. This is 3 inches by 5 inches. And then for the fabric bead, which isn't necessary per se, I've got a 3-inch by 3-inch square. So I'm going to start here with the sewing of the body of the mask. And my machine is just a little loud. I'm going to turn that on. What you're going to do is sew the long sides of this. This is the top and the bottom. So say this is the bottom. We're going to do a straight stitch, back stitching at the beginning, and then we're going to go about part way to create that hole here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to back stitch again to really make that secure. I'm going to take a little leap, and I'm going to back stitch again, forward stitch, and then back stitch. Now, if you're feeling fancy, the best way to keep this fabric from falling out of the mask is to iron this seam allowance open. With an iron, you'd press this. Ooh, that got a little small right there. You'll press this open, and then you can top stitch it flat. So I'm going to use my machine here to top stitch that. Boy, that got a little tiny. And I'm just going to, of course, I'm not pressing this, so just be a little aware. This is kind of messy. Pressing it will definitely help, and the knit fabric is going to be real tough because it's going against the grain and it's kind of squishy and wants to stretch out on you. So I lift my foot a lot when I'm sewing that stuff, and then I'm going to pivot at the end of that opening, and I'm going to finish off the square here. Now it's just going to keep that fabric back inside the mask if you did choose to create that opening. Check the sites of the hospitals that you're trying to support. There's also a lot of information online of people who are distributing that. So this is my opening on the bottom, and it's got that outside stitch to keep it closed. Then I'm going to sew across the top, and this is where we're going to learn how to put the nose piece in. So I'm going to sew across the top, back stitching at either side to close that up. I'm making sure that my seam allowance isn't too small on this one. Lifting my foot because of my stretchy fabrics. A lot of times it helps to keep the stretchy fabrics on the underside because the feed dogs of the machine help to feed that in. People are using, like I think I mentioned, paper clips, but also pipe cleaners. What you can do for the nose piece here is place that pipe cleaner between the edge of the fabric and the stitches that's in your seam allowance. We're going to do a zigzag stitch on either side of the pipe cleaner to capture both sides of it. I'm going to back stitch that in place. It's popping back and forth over the wire, keeping it down. Back stitch. All right. So I've got my top and I've got my bottom, and now I'm going to pull it inside out and do my box pleat. So this part, we're going to flatten everything out. I'm going to fold it in half to find the center. Sometimes you gotta wiggle those pieces. Okay, and I've got my side here with the fold on it, and I want to be about, in my design, 1 inch from the fold, and that's something you can kind of eyeball. So the goal would be 1.5 inches on this side so that it would open up to 3 inches total. And I'm going to do the other side. Fold from the fold side 1 inches in. All right, and then we're going to create the box pleat. We're going to open up flat from the top. That box pleat faces out. I'm going to stick a scissors in there to kind of help guide that fabric down. And then I'm going to leave the pin in horizontal as I sew across. That's going to keep the pleat in place. If I pull it out too soon, the fabric will spread. And get back to the straight stitch. I don't even need a back stitch on this. This is just kind of like a basting line. All right, going right across. I usually back stitch by force of habit. This side too, scissors can help guide that fabric down. I'm going to pull my pin out so I can see it just part way. And I lift the foot a lot to just help that fabric through. Oop, back stitched it on accident. All right, I got a box pleat in there. Now I'm going to put my sides on, and these, my method is to put it face up, slap my mask face down, and do a little burrito wrap. And I'm going to sew just a little bit in from my previous stitch line. So make sure I'm going forward. Got my straight stitch. Back stitch on this one. Pull that out and do the other side. That's fabric face up, mask face down. Pull my pin out. Burrito wrap. And then sew just a little bit in from that line so that that old stitch line doesn't show. Gotta be careful. Gotta sew forward, back stitch, sew forward, and back stitch. All right, so these are the pipings, but they're not done yet. We need to sew, fold and sew. So we're gonna peel these out. And then we're going to fold these up. So in this design here, I've got the first fold is just to the seam allowance, and then the second fold goes just over the lip of the stitches from before. This is called Stitch in the Ditch. We're going to flip that over and pop 2 pins in, one on either side, and I'm just making sure that the lip of that fabric is just past the ditch of this side. We're going to stitch in the ditch of that old seam, and it's going to catch my fabric on the other side. One more time, double fold. That meets up at the seam allowance. You can kind of vary that based on how thick your elastic is, how much room you got in there. Stitch in the ditch. So that is just a straight stitch. You are going to back stitch, and you can also just kind of leave those pins in the whole time. I like to sew back and then forward again. That way, actually, when you clip these, you can just run the scissors right up to it. If you stop here, there's going to be like a little floaty of thread, and that's slightly more difficult and inefficient to trim away. Okay, second side. Go forward, go backward, go forward, stitching in the ditch. And then here I get to the end, I'm going to sew backwards, but then I'm going to sew forward again so that my last stitch isn't kind of in the middle of the fabric. Just little tricks that you figure out as you go. I'm going to pull my pins out, and I'm ready to stuff my elastic. But first I want to make my bead. So if you're doing this kind of thing, we're going to face that one down. You're going to fold them, meet them in the middle and the back side, and then you're going to fold that good side, that right side, into the center. Now this is going to be my bead, but I don't need all of this. I'm just going to guesstimate about 3/4 of an inch to an inch. Forward stitch, back stitch, forward stitch, back stitch. Pop that out of there. This is a little bit big right now, so I'm going to, the seam allowance, I'm going to trim that off. And then when you flip stuff like this, you can use a big safety pin. I'm going to put that safety from the outside to the inside along the fold there. Pop the head back down so that you can dip it into the center of the pipe and fly out the other side. Take that pin off and just peel. Take a second to peel that out of there. You need a fresh piece of elastic. This is 3/8 inch. I'm sorry. This is 1/8 inch elastic. You're going to slide that onto the pin. And then this is a little difficult because sometimes you can come into the folds with the pin. So you want to just ride the curve. You want to ride the seam allowance to try to get that through successfully. This pin is a little short. Let's see. See, the head can get stuck in there. Let me get it. There's my big pin. The big ones always work a little bit better. So you want to stay close to the seam allowance, and that will help you get in and out of there a little safer. Here I got stuck again. And if I have trouble, I usually try the other side. This one didn't have as much of a double fold. Where'd it go? Come on out. There we go. So you're going to go out that piping. I'm going through my bead. Can happen the same thing there. It can get stuck in that fold. We're going to go in and out of this one. Pull that through a little further first. Then back through the bead and connect to this. Okay, so I'm going to just do a balloon knot on these. I call it a balloon knot. I'm not sure what the technical term is. Instead of tying these together twice, I'm just going to line them up on top of each other and use my finger to create the loop, send them through. And that's 32 inches that goes all the way around on this design. Just tighten it up close to the end, and then I arrange it so that that knot is just sitting inside the piping. And then arrange this. Okay? Get back in there. All right. So, spend a little time trimming it up, but hopefully your mask can be used by people who are fighting on the front lines here with this stuff, and it's got that wire in the tip, some kind of a hole that still allows the filter to enter but is also breathable, and or is large enough to fit over the original mask. So we are doing all we can, and stay safe, my friends. Thanks for watching.